We're going to hear from our keynote speaker, who this afternoon, his name is Chris Castro, and he's going to be presenting on Orlando, Sustainable and Resilient. Chris is the director of Orlando's Office of Sustainability and Resilience, developing policies and programs to advance the city's sustainability, clean energy, and climate action goals. He helped develop and found Ideas for Us, a United Nations accredited nonprofit, Citizen Energy, a clean energy consulting firm, and Fleet Farming, an urban farming social enterprise that redefines local food systems by building organic farms on residential lawns. He currently sits on more than 10 nonprofit and academic boards, including the Florida Solar Energy Center, the U.S. Green Building Council of Florida, Project Green Schools, and Goodwill of Central Florida. He has previously worked with the University of Central Florida, Orange County Government, and the U.S. Department of Energy, and he's been recognized for his efforts in sustainability and resilience by former Presidents Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, and former Vice President Al Gore. Please give us a warm welcome to Chris Castro.
I got my clicker up here and stuff. Should be right there. Okay, fantastic. Hey everyone, good afternoon. First of all, a huge thanks to you all for being flexible with the timing. I hit some of our traffic on the way over here. I guess there was a couple of crashes, and so big thanks to the planners for helping to mitigate that risk a little bit. In addition, I really want to thank the host of this event for inviting me to come and speak to you all. I like to get out to different communities and really share some of the work that we're doing in Orlando, and hopefully it's an opportunity for you to take back things that we can implement right here in Sarasota County and the city of Sarasota. So really excited to share some of that. And it's hard to follow a panel like that. I have a lot of respect for my colleagues who work in this space, Stevie and Lee Hayes, and so many of their team who are driving forward the change we need to see in this part of our state. And so huge props to them. So it was asked for me to just give a little overview of my history before I dive in deep with some of the stuff in the city. And in my introduction, it was mentioned that I'm also an entrepreneur. I'm a social entrepreneur, and I actually consider myself more of a social entrepreneur than a government official or a gov entrepreneur, whatever we call that. But really, I think it's important to realize that it's going to take that type of mindset for us to address a lot of these challenges. I grew up in Miami, Florida. I'm a second-generation Cuban American, and growing up there, my parents owned a palm tree nursery. So I grew up on a farm, and at first, for many parts of my life, it was, Chris, you're punished. You're going to the farm for the weekend. And that was something I didn't really embrace or enjoy very much. And little by little, right around my 8th grade, 9th grade setting, I started to get a lot of interest in the environment. I picked up surfing. I was doing a lot of scuba diving, things in the ocean, of course, being down there in the Biscayne Bay, fishing, and it's just hard to not love the natural world. And that's what really grounded me in wanting to do something to protect it, preserve it, regenerate it, do something that's better. I ended up going up to the University of Central Florida to do my studies. I studied environmental science and policy and engineering focused in the energy systems. And when I was there, I started to get a lot of interest from some of my peers around what we're doing to address the climate crisis. And if you may or may not remember, but there was this kind of wave of universities that began to sign these climate commitments. And it was a big deal. Harvard and the Ivy League started, and then it started to become a movement. Now there are literally thousands of colleges and universities. And I was the culprit at UCF that started being the thorn in our president's shoe to move it forward. I ended up passing referendums through student body. We ended up getting the Board of Trustees to sign it, and it became a huge deal of us moving towards a carbon neutral campus by the year of 2050. And then the question became, well, what do we do about it? And how do we empower and engage and educate the student body on this campus, who ultimately is the reason why we're here? And how do we give them the experience to do it? And that's why I ended up founding a nonprofit organization called Ideas for Us. The whole effort was to not be an environmental advocacy or environmental activism group, because we felt that was important, but there was a missing link, in my opinion, and that was environmental action. getting people hands-on and engaged in some form of environmental action projects that in my opinion, created this paradigm shift in our mindset and in our behaviors that allowed us to be champions for better progressive environmental policies and programs and ways of life. And so this organization, Ideas for Us, started out as a student organization, getting people from all disciplines. I'm talking communications majors, education majors, engineers, you name it, social workers, coming together to start thinking about how do we green our campus. We started with an on-campus energy challenge. We called it Kill a Watt. And we ended up getting some funding, and killing watts was our goal. And in a 3-month period, we ended up saving $55,000 for the university net. And they said, are you kidding me? This is the best return on investment we've ever made. Like, how do we continue that? And little by little, things started snowballing. On-campus recycling, the on-campus garden program. We started to do everything, it was tailgate initiatives to kind of green the tailgates. And what I didn't realize is that this would turn into a bit of a grassroots movement. Through the use of social media, I was using that as a megaphone. And for those who follow me online, I still use my social media as an educational tool and a megaphone. And other students from different campuses said, wow, that's innovative. We have groups on campus doing protest and civil disobedience, but we don't really have anybody driving the solutions that we need to see. And so, long story short, we end up building momentum, and in the first 2 years growing to a group of 25 universities and colleges all across the state of Florida and in parts of the US. In 2012, stumbling at 2 in the morning, this opportunity to join the United Nations as an accredited NGO, I ended up applying and being accepted to go down to Brazil for Rio Plus 20. This was the 20th anniversary of the Earth Summit, and there I got to speak on behalf of the United States as a youth delegate of the UN and really share the work that we were doing to, again, educate, engage, and empower the youth to get engaged in sustainability action. And so I've had quite the honor of speaking at the UN a number of different times in different parts of the world. And following that trip in Brazil, Ideas for Us grew internationally. And we began to get a lot of interest from universities all throughout sub-Saharan Africa, throughout Southeast Asia, even the Middle East. And what gives me hope is that places that have the least amount of resources out there are coming up with some of the most innovative ways for us to solve these problems. And it's fascinating to see. Today we've done work in over 30 countries, 200 different projects that have been developed and funded, and over 30,000 members that are part of this organization still today. And in short, this organization does 3 major things. One is we develop ideas through what's called the Ideas Hive. And in fact, over the course of this past year, we've been working in St. Petersburg. They provided some funding through a local family foundation, and this program has been on a monthly basis, basically a think and do tank for sustainability action. It becomes the way to build capacity and get all ages and all disciplines in a room every single month to focus on global and local environmental challenges, and then through a series of breakouts and human-centered design and biomimicry, we work on developing these projects. In addition, we saw that there is this gap in small-scale funding for a lot of our chapters who were really wanting to implement these projects, and the difference between $1,000 is the difference between implementing and doing a proof of concept and not. And so we started a micro-granting program called the Solutions Fund, and it was all focused on gathering proposals from our chapters and other members across the network who wanted to implement projects, everything from clean water wells to, at the bottom right there is our chapters in Kasisi district of Uganda who worked on building 100,000+ fruit tree nursery that's now employing locals and helping them to reforest their areas, and it's just been amazing. And one of the, I think, important parts that we're working on with Ideas for Us is the connection of this local work to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There is a global framework for sustainable development, and it's important for us to try to figure out how our actions here in our own communities help to contribute to the greater goals. And so as you can see, many different projects we try to tie. Now sometimes, and this has happened 4 times in our history, but sometimes we have these gems that come out of this process of a community think tank around the Hive, and then small-scale funding, and then we see that there's not only a proof of concept, but there's a social enterprise business model that's been built. And one of our gems is called fleet farming. And this was an epiphany that we had where we identified that there's a ton of wasted space throughout our communities, not just in Orlando, but around this country. It's actually the #1 most farmed crop in this country is sod and grass. And the amount of water and energy that goes into making that happen would boggle all of our minds. And the whole point was that we're also in this conundrum where every day 3,000 agricultural land acres are lost to development. Obviously, we're building for more communities. And so for me, it was like, well, if we're losing our ag land to development, where are we going to grow our food into the future? And for me, it was in our communities, and we got to get creative about doing that. And so we ended up getting a major spotlight. I don't know if this is going to play by NBC Nightly News, and Lester Holt picked it up, and he made it national. And people all over this country have now reached out to replicate the work that fleet farming has been doing. You can see a little bit of some of the visuals.
Well, a garage.
Why are we growing 40 million acres of lawns just to make them look nice when they can look beautiful and be productive?
This group of volunteers, led by Chris Castro, is trying to change the way we eat.
We're going to plant one of the seeds
by turning your front yard into a full-fledged farm.
This is called a what? A farmlet?
Farmlet, yes. We can micro-urban farming.
After leaving his day job as Orlando's Director of Sustainability, Chris hops on his bike, leading a swarm of volunteers who pedal door to door, farming neighbors' lawns.
They said, yeah, we'll come in and we'll plant a garden in your yard and we'll maintain it and we'll do all the work and you just get to enjoy it.
We do everything for the homeowner, and essentially all they have to do is provide the land for us to do it.
And the idea is sprouting roots. There's even 300 people waiting to get their lawns farmed.
We are on the waiting list and have signed the agreement and ready to go.
It's free of charge. Owners keep a portion of their produce, and volunteers take the rest to local farmers markets and restaurants, where it's cut, cooked, and delivered to your plate.
They're delivering us kale, they bring us watermelon, radishes are coming soon.
For some, it's about more than just the food.
What do you hope that your kids take away from this?
That they can do things themselves, and that they can create things themselves, not just the farm, but a movement.
A movement that keeps growing and growing. Morgan Radford, NBC News, Orlando.
So pretty neat, overview there. These are the types of innovations that I think are going to play a role in solving this problem. It is not the end-all be-all. We will not solve world hunger and food insecurity with the fleet farming model, but it is one of the pieces of the pie, and we need to continue to foster that type of innovation, which is why it's so important to have things like the Ideas Hive continuously foster those types of ideas in our community. So that's a little of my background. That's not why I came here to speak to you all. I came here to speak to you all about the work that I'm doing in the city, but I think it helps give some context to my interest, my passion, and the work that I've been doing the last 15 years or so in this space. And so Orlando is certainly in this interesting renaissance. Orlando right now is the 3rd fastest growing community in the entire country. We have net between 1,000 and 1,500 people per week who are moving to our city to live, work, or learn, right? And so you can think about, obviously, the challenges that comes with growth, but on top of that, we are also the most visited city in America. And for every one resident that actually lives, works, and learns in Orlando, there's 255 times the amount of people who actually come to visit our city. It's about 200,000 people per day who are coming to Orlando, of course, to play. And we want them to come to play, it's important, but when you're on vacation, often, and probably outside of this room, this is not the case, but it is the case that most people, when they're on vacation, aren't thinking about environmental conservation or being good stewards. They're pumping the AC down in their hotel rooms, they're taking longer showers, think about 75 million toilet flushes, right? And then in addition, they're producing about a ton of waste, and they get to go back onto a plane, back home, and we have to deal with those unintended consequences. That's a big reason why sustainability has been a core priority for our mayor, Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer. When I decided to leave the work that I've been doing in the private sector and through nonprofits and join the government, it was a major decision point for me. And the reason why I left is because it is seldom that we find ourselves in front of elected officials who are trying to get you to join their team, and who at the same time are directly in alignment with your mindset about what we need to do to enhance quality of life, to protect environment and natural resources, and to generate a growing green economy. And that's why I said, you know what, with your support, we can do some big things together in Orlando. Mayor Dyer has been thinking about this for quite some time. He launched a program called Greenworks Orlando. Just as you can remember the year that I started at UCF, that was the same year he started in the city, thinking about sustainability. And most of the times when our programs are being established, we look under the hood and we really look at what can we do to minimize costs, to reduce environmental footprints of government operations. For the first 5 years, that's what it was focused on, and I came into the city to pivot the perspective, not just internally, but also starting to look externally. How do we create these societal, community-wide goals? This talk that I'm going to talk about today, and as you can see, I oversee a considerable amount for the city in terms of the work that we do, but I'm going to talk about 3 of our core pillars. And the pillars are really tied in, not only with the Sustainable Development Goals, because we're one of the first cities to begin to tie our local priorities with this global Sustainable Development Agenda, but in addition, trying to figure out how do we address the climate crisis. I came into the city as the only dedicated person working on sustainability, and I know Stevie and Lee Hayes, we realize that our teams are often small and we're asked to do unbelievable transformations within the community. And one thing I've been able to figure out is how to build teams, not just in this role, but in the roles that I've done thus far. Today, my Office of Sustainability and Resilience is no longer just an initiative in the mayor's office. I purposefully took it out of the mayor's office to establish it in perpetuity within the city. And we created an Office of Sustainability and Resilience. And in addition, that came with funding and a budget, and I've been able to grow this office to now 12 people on payroll, 10 interns, and at the same time, about $1 million budget to keep us moving in this direction because of how influential the work that we've been doing is going to the overall city. Climate has been such an important factor in Mayor's prioritization of this aspect. And as you can see here, there's over a dozen different coalitions and networks at the international, national, and local level that we are engaged in. One of those, Stevie is actually a co-chair of, and that's the Florida Sustainability Directors Network. And we work on mobilizing these types of work across the state of Florida. And so you have a good leader here locally at the helm of that network. This image is of Mayor Dyer signing this Under 2 MOU. It's the official Paris Climate Agreement for subnational governments. And there are literally thousands and thousands of states, cities, provinces, universities, businesses across the world. You might have heard of WASI, the We Are Still In coalition, right? So regardless of what the federal government thinks, believe it or not, we are still in this country, no matter what he tries to do. And what's exciting is there's this grassroots upwelling that came after that June of 2017 discussion at the White House lawn. And literally minutes after that, several mayors get tweets about us leaving Paris, and they're tweeting back and forth, and Mayor Dyer gets involved, and he's one of the first 10 mayors to launch what we call the Climate Mayors Movement. Now there's over 400 mayors. There are 24 states, and there are thousands of universities and businesses who have not only said we're upholding the Paris Agreement, but we're doubling down and we're going further. Our goal is the 1.5 degree rise, not the 2 degree rise. So that's a big, big deal. This stuff is all data-driven. This stuff is all, it needs to be data-driven, and so we've been doing our annual greenhouse gas inventory since 2007. I retroactively went back and started to calculate all of the impacts that we've had, and I'm happy to say that something exciting is happening. Because of this work, we're beginning to see a decoupling of economic growth and GDP and emissions that are now starting to flatline and on the way and on the decline. We've seen a 9% reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions from 2007 to now, and that is with the growth of our economy of over 30%. There is an unbelievable rise here that's happening. So we've officially started to decouple. The question becomes, what are the wedges that we need to invest in from a technology standpoint, from a policy standpoint, for us to drive our goals, which is 90% reduction of GHG emissions by the year of 2040. Not 80 by 50, but 90 by 40. Shoot for the moon, and we'll get somewhere hopefully in between. So in looking at the data, what shocked me was the amount of emissions that were associated with our built environment, with buildings. When you look at around this country, you see right now transportation just breaching over electricity generation. It's right around 39%. We also have industrial, we have electricity generation, and you have your buildings, residential and commercial. But when you start to dive into major urban settings, like Orlando or Chicago or DC or New York or San Fran, Denver, you name it, most of their emissions are associated with the built environment and the energy supply actually feeding that built environment. And so for us, it's 80% of our emissions. For Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, 80% of our emissions. And so for me, I said, well, that's the 80,000-pound gorilla. What types of policies and programs can we wrap around in an ecosystem to help us accelerate the work that we need to see? First of all, we need to begin reducing energy use intensity within our homes and our commercial buildings. It is the most cost-effective way for us to reduce CO2 emissions, overall air particulate pollutions, but also it drives an economy. It creates jobs. It saves the business money. It's the no-brainer economic business case for climate action. And so when you look at the country's overall energy mix, you begin to look on the left-hand side real quick. This is a spaghetti flow chart that's built by Lawrence Livermore National Lab, one of our 17 national labs in the US. They look at the overall energy supply. And on the left side, you have everything from coal and natural gas all the way up to your renewables. In the middle, in pink, you have your demand. The 4 key sectors that demand that energy include transportation, residential, commercial, and industrial. And what's fascinating, though, really is the light gray. The light gray is rejected energy, or what's known as energy waste. And if you look at it, 2/3 of the energy that we're consuming to go to work, to light this room, to run this projector, to heat and cool our homes and our buildings, 2/3 of it goes to waste, is lost to heat, to vibration, to inefficiencies throughout the system. Everything from the power plant, to the transmission, to the distribution, down to the end user. We in Orlando, like many of our governments, are major consumers of power. We're major customers for the utility. We have a $19 million power bill. And our wastewater treatment plants are #1 for energy use, and they usually are. And our stadium and conferences, centers are 2, 3, and 4. But we decided to do a couple things. First is, we have now a mandate, a requirement for all new city buildings to be built above Florida Building Code, and in fact to be built to a LEED Silver spec or above. Obviously, we're going to see efficiency gains throughout that, but there's other wraparound sustainability improvements that you get with LEED. But then, what about all of the other buildings, the hundreds of buildings that we've built, some of which weren't even around when the building code was around, and how do we retrofit them and bring them up to par? So we went, myself, our head of facilities, our CAO, we actually packaged a proposal and we walked into the CFO's office to have a meeting. And the meeting was, we'd like to ask for $17.5 million. You should have seen her face. And she said, well, what are you going to do with this money? And I said, well, we're going to retrofit our buildings. We're going to improve occupancy comfort. We're going to improve the overall utilities and lower costs for taxpayers. And she said, wow, that sounds pretty interesting. What's the return? I said, well, if you amortize it over the bond, blah, blah, blah. We ended up getting the money and now are saving over $2 million per year in avoided costs compared to the baseline. These are doing simple things, changing incandescence and fluorescence to LEDs, we've got that. Putting building automation and control systems in our buildings so that in real time we can monitor how this building is using energy. And then some HVAC improvements. We're now tracking again towards at least in the 15-year period, a 7-year return on investment. And we're already taking about $250,000 per year and revolving it in a revolving energy fund. So now we have this additional fund that we're going to reuse and reallocate into more buildings to save more money, to put more money back into that fund, and you have this recycling initiative. It's not enough, though, to build it to the LEED spec. If our goal is moving towards decarbonization, we need to make sure that every new building is also built to produce power, primarily from solar. And so we've built a solar-ready design guide, which I'm happy to share. I've actually posted it on the USDN website, but I'm happy to share with the whole team here. And it is a technical specification document that helps for either bid solicitations or for our own internal team to ensure that we are making these buildings solar-ready. If we can't land panels immediately when we build it, fine. There are things that we can do to minimize the cost when we do have the resources, everything from ensuring, obviously, the civic engineering of the roof, running conduit to the rooftop, having space for an inverter pad, having enough capacity in the electrical panel. There are small things that are hundreds of dollars in the beginning, but can save thousands over the time. But then we started to say, well, we can do this bond thing and we can retrofit our buildings, but what about the vast majority of facilities in Orlando? How do we get those owners to pay attention and see the money that's literally stacked on the table that they can begin pocketing themselves? And so one of the very controversial policies that we have passed, that we're the only city right now in the state of Florida that has done so, is a policy around building benchmarking, energy audits, and transparency. In a nutshell, it is a policy that requires the information transparency of how buildings use energy, use water, contribute to the greenhouse gas footprint, and over 100 other metrics that are important for overall economic development. And this is done by essentially a free tool, similar to like a miles per gallon on a car, right? You go to a car lot, every vehicle has a fuel economy rating. You go to the grocery store, every product has nutritional facts on it. I guarantee you those manufacturers didn't want to share that information. They were forced. Why? Well, because their products contribute to public health implications. And so do buildings. Buildings don't have a smokestack on top of them, but if they did, you would see the impact of air pollution and impacts on public health that most people are out of sight, out of mind. They don't see it. So, as a result, we've been able to push this forward. It took me 3 years to do, believe it or not, but we did it. And this year, we published the first interactive map on the City of Orlando website. You can zoom into an apartment complex. You can look at how much you're going to spend in one apartment versus another. And you can make now an informed judgment about not just the total cost to lease or rent, but also the total cost of utilities, which often is the second highest cost, and the reason why most people default or foreclose. So this is about driving a market. Once you know your score, then the question becomes, well, how do I get the money to improve that score? How do I get that $17.5 million bond that the city was able to take out? Private sector can't really do that. So we've been working, and many cities around this state have been working on enabling energy financing tools. We have a great nonprofit in the state called SELF, the Solar and Energy Loan Fund. They're a nonprofit clean energy bank. And they literally take CRA capital, they take very low interest dollars, and they reallocate those to low interest loans, primarily targeting low and moderate income communities. 70% of their money has to go to LMI census tracts, and it's all around wind hardening, resilience, energy efficiency, renewables, water conservation, and the like. We also have PACE up and running in Orlando, and we've built out a very competitive PACE market. This is just a snapshot of one of our PACE companies over an 18-month period, and we did $18 million of direct economic investments through this strategy, all focused on adding PV, almost a megawatt of rooftop PV, all focused on reducing energy use and carbon, and the like goes on. So pretty big deal. This is $18 million of direct, $45 million of an overall direct and indirect economic output from just this program in 18 months. This is working. Now we got to double down. The other important part of this, though, is ensuring equity and addressing what we call the energy burden within our communities. There are hotspots in Orlando and I'm sure here in other parts where primarily lower income renters are spending disproportionately more on their utility bills than more affluent communities. And we're talking 3, 4, sometimes 5 times as much when people have the least amount of resources. So we've been mapping what those inequities are. We've done a mapping on electricity, on water, on gas, the eligibility and usage of SNAP and EBT, and transportation modes to give us a better understanding of how do we start to address equity as a core piece of this climate transformation. And
New Horizons is not only a home for residents who reside here or soon will reside here, but this is a place where they'll have graduations and holidays and they will celebrate life in a safe way. So we've got a rooftop solar array, we've got a community garden, we've got native Florida landscaping, and there's a lot of sustainability pieces that are inside the units. And I actually believe we can claim the title of the most sustainable city in the Southeast United States.
So that short little video was an affordable housing complex, and I was able to find some grant funds, and the developer that we partnered with was going to bring them up to the Florida Building Code. And I said, well, let's make this a showcase project. Let's try to get some funds and figure out how much do we need to invest to bring this up to a LEED spec, to the building to be LEED spec, not to fully certify it, but get it to the performance of LEED. It was $250,000 for 58 units. And the homeowners in these units are saving between $400 and $600 per year in electricity cost. That is substantial for somebody who's on a fixed income or even no work, right? This is a big deal. And so now tying in our housing standards so that every time we use SHIP and home and CBDG dollars, we're tying those dollars to efficiency improvements. We're not just giving you the worst AC system because that's what you can afford. We're making sure that the SEER rating is higher. We're not just giving you a hot water heater. We're making sure that it's Energy Star certified and it's one of the most efficient. Because at the end of the day, these people might have low rents. They may be $550 or $600 for rent, but they're spending $250 to $300 in utilities. They're no longer in affordability. They're in burden. And so we need to look at the holistic picture. And that's one thing that we're doing. I need to keep running very quickly, so I'm going to run. That was buildings. I'm going to go through very quickly clean energy and then transportation very, very quick. We're in this transformation. We heard from Stevie and the team about their challenges in working with utilities in making this transformation a reality. Orlando is unique in that we own our own electric and water utility, OUC. So that gives us a little bit more control, but I'm here to say that it's not all roses either. There are some challenges that come with. We are one of the Ready for 100 cities, and I'm happy to hear that that seems to be moving in this community as well. And this was a historic time. Not only did we sign the pledge, but we passed a formal resolution through council and passed a resolution through our utility to commit us to 100% renewables by 2050 citywide and by 2030 for government operations. So the time is ticking. And the question on the last panel was, well, how are we actually going to do that? How are we getting there? And a lot of our cities are really starting to figure out some of the technical details on how we're doing that. First and foremost, like we did with the energy efficiency, we need to lead by example. We need to begin investing in it as a government so that we can help to de-risk our communities, businesses, and residents to make those same investments. This is an example of a large 420 kilowatt rooftop array, and it's on top of essentially our maintenance facility. And on the right-hand side is design specs for a new carport, a 250 kilowatt carport that essentially will cover the cars over here that you can kind of barely see, and it will provide solar PV and conduits to electric vehicle charging stations, 17 dual-hosed EV charging stations. That will be our EV lot. And so we're starting to do a lot of PV. This is one of the most recent buildings we've built that was LEED certified, LEED Silver, and in addition, we were able to not only make it solar ready, but add PV to it. And so little by little, this is the first net zero energy facility, meaning we're more than overproducing for the power needs at that site. And this site, once the 250 comes online, would be also a net exporter into the grid. But the next step is really targeting critical facilities. This year, I've been allocated $3.2 million of capital improvement funds to begin addressing resilience and climate action. And part of that money, 2.3 of that 3.2, will go towards rooftop solar projects on critical facilities. 911 call center, emergency operations centers, fire stations, community centers to become houses of refuge during storms. And so we've actually mapped out and done site assessments, as you can see a screenshot here, of the technical feasibility of each one of these, even adding battery storage. What does that look like to the economics? And that's helping us to make the case. I'm telling you, this assessment that I did, which was using an NREL tool called REOPT, helped me approach the CFO to get the $3.2 million. So it's all about doing this kind of technical deep dive and then showing the numbers. And the numbers usually speak for themselves. We've also looked citywide. And we said, well, if we were to add solar on every rooftop that potentially could add it, that isn't shaded, that doesn't have these factors, how much are we talking? Well, this looked at 4+ gigawatts of installed capacity on rooftops alone in Orlando. Our peak is 1.2 gigawatts. So you're talking about more than twice as much, almost 3 times as much power can be produced than what we currently need in 2019. But of course, our goal is 2050. And our load probably will grow with population and the like, so we need to start to look at that. And so when cities are claiming these 100% renewable goals, we have to start projecting load, we have to start looking at the potential generation, and where we can begin to make major inroads. The other really neat initiative is a solar co-op. Who here has heard of the Florida Sun group in Florida here? Florida Solar United Neighbors, excellent. So a good amount of us. These co-ops are going statewide. It launched in Orlando in 2016. They've done now over 50 different co-ops, 14 megawatts of installed capacity, about $35 million worth of economic development. And it's all about neighbors coming together to bulk purchase panels so that we can achieve economies of scale. In Orlando, we just launched another one in August. We already have over 250 members signed up, and we are beginning to see that progress grow. But some homeowners can't put rooftop. So what happens for those who live in apartments or condos? We're now pivoting to also larger scale solar farms. This is one on top of an old landfill in Orlando. It's actually a coal ash landfill, so I find the irony quite interesting. And so this is a massive array. We have about 20 megawatts of community solar, and so people can virtually subscribe into these plants and offset consumption. I know that FPL is recently getting approval from the PSC. I don't know where it lands right now, but it looks like FPL will have a community solar program as well, the largest in the country if it gets approved. So you all will be able to do this same thing. We've done a lot to procure from that solar farm, and so City Hall, 17 fire stations, and the police headquarters have been powered by solar for a long time, for the last 2 years, January 1st of 2018. And we're also exploring photovoltaics, floating solar on retention pond water bodies, right? These are man-made pits to hold stormwater when they hit impervious pavement. Why not create an ability where we land floating solar near the load? And so this is a small system. It's only 35 kilowatts, but we have a 500 kilowatt array that's being installed at the airport of Orlando. So the next time when you fly into OIA, you will see floating solar on some of the ponds around the airport, which is quite fascinating. In closing, and I'll run through this one even faster, transportation's got a lot of good stuff happening around the state, and what we're trying to really do is enhance the multimodal, right? Part of the climate solution is reducing vehicle miles traveled, getting people out of cars and into alternative forms. And so a ton of stuff with bike share and scooter share and autonomous shuttles now. We even have of course, the Bright Line is coming from South, now Virgin Train is coming from Miami and hopefully connecting out here in the West Florida timeframe. But EVs is what I really want to touch on and getting us to be EV ready. We have a growth of electric vehicles that we are not capable of keeping up with at this point in time. And in Orlando, we've tried to use Recovery Act funding and others to create a network of EV chargers. We now have a significant amount of EV charging stations throughout the city. And the load forecast that we've identified is that 67% of vehicles on the road by 2050 will be electric, battery electric vehicles in 30 years. You're talking about a complete transformation, and the load growth is 544,000 megawatt hours. You're talking about a lot a lot of power. So we've been mapping out where the EV infrastructure is. We have about 358 ports, meaning parking spots that vehicles can park and charge in, and we're adding an additional 100 charging stations and 200 ports over the course of this next year. That's part of the capital improvement dollars that we got. So this is kind of a map of where those things will land. I think one of the most exciting things that I've been pushing is the EV buses. And in downtown, we have this BRT, bus rapid transit system, that we have a goal of transitioning to fully all electric. We just got $2 million from DOT to begin that process and buy the first 8 buses for this transformation. Does this stuff, and this is in closing, does this stuff move the needle? Is it impacting us in a positive way? Well, when I walked into the city in 2014, I ranked Orlando in this report that happens every year. It's American Council for Energy Efficient Economies, ACEEE, and they do a city scorecard for clean energy strategy and performance. And back in 2014, we were 30th in the US, second best in the Southeast, and we had a lot of room to grow. 2017 comes around, they rescore us. We end up moving from 30th to 20th in the US. We were the most energy improved city in America in that time period. And just earlier this year, we got the updated numbers, and we're now 15th in the US and best in the Southeast United States. We moved from 30th to 15th. This is unbelievable. This is a big deal. So this type of stuff works. And this is really just scratching the surface on the initiatives, but it gives you an idea of the types of diversity in our approach. It's not just about energy and buildings. It's also transportation. It's also renewable energy. It's also nature-based solutions that I haven't even talked about. Urban forestry and wetland protection. These are all critical pieces of the overall climate solution puzzle. So with that, I will end. I don't know if I'm going to get questions now because I ran over a little bit on my time, but I will be here later this afternoon for a Q&A session, and I look forward to engaging with you all then. Thank you again. A pleasure.